Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Zach.
And I'm Seth.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right, we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
Did you have a good Easter?
I had a great Easter because we put out a good episode.
Did you find a lot of Easter eggs?
No. Did you?
Yes, I did. In fact, I did.
That's nice. I'm glad. How many did you find?
I found at least 3.
At least
all
3?
in Red Dead Redemption.
I love Red Dead Redemption. Is that the game you've been recently playing?
No, I've been playing another game that's been more recent, but also is old.
Ooh, what game is that?
Recently, I've been playing Oblivion, but it's been remastered. It's Remastered Oblivion. It was released on April 22nd of this year, 2025, and it seems that Bethesda Softworks has figured out they have sold enough Skyrims. Now it is time to go back in the past and sell some Oblivion. And so now they're going to, which I feel like they also sold a lot of at that time. What's fun that I learned was that there was a group of modders who were moving Oblivion into Skyrim. Did you hear about those?
Yeah, Skyblivion.
Bethesda gave each one of them a copy of Oblivion Remastered.
Yeah, I saw that. So some people, I think, were afraid that if Bethesda was going to release a remaster of Oblivion, which, truth be told, despite the fact that Bethesda they basically just quietly dropped this game randomly on a Tuesday, but a lot of news about it had kind of leaked. People already knew that it was in the works. We just didn't know how far along it was. But I think people were wondering if Bethesda was going to cease and desist Skyblivion. But no, they seem to be pretty chill with it, which I'm happy about.
I think Bethesda's always been pretty chill when it comes to modding, especially since they realized they could make money from it.
So yes, Bethesda has been always very chill about it, but Bethesda's currently owned by a major company that's a little less chill with intellectual property.
So I think one of the things that we do have to talk about, though, is the ever-increasing scope creep of these video games. Oblivion, released back in 2006, was 5.5 gigabytes. Also, fun fact, Oblivion was the death knell of one of my computers. It was the reason why I bought a new computer, because my computer that I owned couldn't run Oblivion. So then I threw it in the trash and bought a computer that could run Oblivion. So 2006, it was 5.5 gigabytes, and that's including all the X-Packs and stuff like that. The Game of the Year size was 5.5. Oblivion Remastered came out. Check the size on that. 115 gigabytes.
It's a big chunky guy.
What's going on here? I feel like these game developers are just going with unchecked power. There will be within our lifetime a game that takes up a terabyte.
Man.
I think Call of Duty does now, or close to it. However, so I'm playing Oblivion. In it, I'm playing an Argonian named Graxius, and I think he's going to be a fighter guy and eventually dabble into other professions, as you often do. I say that and immediately become a stealth Khajiit all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So Graxius, he's an interesting fellow. He had the Emperor and a number of guards come into his cell, and while doing so, they glitched out and they started shoving each other, and then they started shoving each other closer and closer to me, and unnaturally they just started coming closer, and they were get in the back of the cell, prisoner, get in the back of the cell, prisoner. And so I kept pushing back up against the window, and I was as far back as I could, and they kept getting closer, and then the guard got really close to me, and he says, "This doesn't concern you, prisoner." And I was like, buddy, I could see your high definition nose hairs. The pathfinding was so bad in the cell that I was shoved up against the corner, and then Patrick Stewart, the Emperor of Tamriel, had to clip through one of the guards to talk to me, because he needed to talk to me about what was going on, while the guard was yelling at me for being too close.
Yeah.
Then I followed them, as you often do, into the mystery, and they get jumped pretty early on by these red knight guys. They're red dawn, and they come out of nowhere, and they're in red robes, and the game glitched out again to where I think either I went too slow or something. I don't know, something happened. They glitched out, they were going down. All of a sudden the red dawn teleported around, and then the guards just died that are supposed to die. They just died. Didn't see the fight. They just some teleportation, then they died, and the fight was so chaotic. I was trying to punch one of the red guards, and I just slugged one of the guards. The blade blades in the face, and they were like, "Oh, you're going to be in trouble for that." And then there was one of the guards is dead. I didn't know this, but you could just take the guard's like katana and her sword. Maybe you could take it in the original one. Yeah, so then I picked up her katana and sword. Then I was gonna wear Red Dawn stuff because my reptile was naked, and he thought that he could just wear a big red cloak. But then he thought, maybe I shouldn't just run around looking like the Red Dawn. And so then he found some rusty armor and dressed himself like an Imperial soldier, except he looks like he's a reptile. He's a blue reptile with a dark blue accent and lighter blue as you get to more of his mass. He's gonna go down like a fighting sword and board, I'm thinking. But yeah, so Graxius. Well, we may talk more about Graxius in future episodes as I play through Oblivion again, but I'm still pretty early on in the game, so beyond having a name and having a vague idea of what I want to do, that's pretty much where I'm at. So, Zach.
Yes, Seth.
What have you recently been playing?
Recently, I've been playing Primrose, Rose spelled ROWS. And as a disclaimer, this was a game I received for free from the developers. It was developed by Tersiops Truncatus Studios and released on April 17th, 2025. Tersiops Truncatus Studios might be familiar to some of our longtime listeners. They were featured on Indie Dev Lounge episode 8 when we talked to them about The Day We Fought Space, a mobile game that they were demoing at PAX East one of the years that we went. Primrose is their new game. It's available on Steam, and it's a Sudoku-inspired puzzle game. Your goal is to make sure you have columns, rows, and squares that have unique flowers. So, for example, your starter grid is a 4x4 grid, and there are 4 types of flowers. The grid is divided into 4 sectors, so you can't have matching flowers in either any of the sectors, in any of the rows, or in any of the columns. So again, like Sudoku, so just pretend that the flowers are numbers. That's pretty much it. I mean, it's kind of it's a very cute, relaxing game. It's got some really nice graphics. There are larger and larger grids that you can use if you want to challenge yourself. I'm really bad at Sudoku, so I didn't play any of the really challenging ones, but I liked what I played. I do like Sudoku. It's a relaxing game. It's a game that I feel like I'm doing a lot of thinking, though I don't actually think I'm doing as much thinking as I think I'm thinking.
You're just thinking enough? And
this kind of gives it a little friendly element of these cute flowers with silly faces on them. One thing I do like is that you don't necessarily need to have a perfect board to win a round. Ideally, you do get a perfect board if you can, but there is a random element involved. So sometimes it's not easy to get a perfect board. And a lot of it is just determining how you prim certain flowers to ensure that you get closer and closer to an ideal setup. Obviously, the less duplicates you have in the grid sectors and rows give you a higher score, but it's not mandatory to have a 100% perfected grid. And a little different from Sudoku, you can't place a designated flower in a blank spot. It uses kind of a randomization element to it that does add for some unique elements to the game. But yeah, that's Primrose. Check it out. It's on Steam. And again, I got my copy for free, but it's definitely worth picking up if you like a good puzzle game.
Yeah, and I believe we're going to have the developers on after PAX.
Yes, hopefully we'll get them on sometime after PAX. So you can pick up the game. It is on sale right now, actually 15% off until May 1st. So it's available for $6.79. MSRP is $7.99, which is certainly less than most AAA games. In fact, I think most AAA games are like 10 times that price. So
yeah, it's about 10% of a AAA game today, but it's a even smaller percent compared to some of the games that we're going to talk about in this episode.
That's right. So we're talking about rare/expensive games. Probably more expensive versus rare, but it's a topic that I think is interesting, especially as someone like myself who is interested in game collecting. But as a kind of a little brief summary of what we're going to be talking about in today's episode, rarity is incredibly subjective. One of my favorite YouTubers, Scott the Woz, once pointed out that simply having a common game like Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and putting a marking on it like a Sharpie line makes that game unique, and thus that is rare. So like my copy of Sonic 2 that has my name written on it from when I was a child is a one-of-a-kind rare copy of Sonic 2.
Unless there is another Zach who also Sharpied his copy of the game in the exact same pattern.
That's the thing though, right? Like, it's a very subjective thing to have a rare game. Another potential issue that could come into play with a rarity for a game is location. A game released exclusively in Taiwan, not exactly common in the United States or Europe. So for example, I have some Taiwanese exclusive games in my collection. They are rare compared to, say, a game you could go find at a video game store. But if you go to Taiwan, they're not as rare there. So for the sake of making this episode easy to follow and also to kind of have a little bit of sanity in our setup, we're going to set some ground rules. Basically, for anything Nintendo NES onward, it has to be licensed. The only reason I say onward is because the NES was really the first major game system in the United States to have a licensing system. Atari did not have one, so Atari's kind of fair game. We're also only going to be talking about games that must have had a US or EU release. The game cannot be a prototype that was leaked. We're not talking about any competition variants, and we're not talking about any homebrew, indie, or modern limited releases. So if a company that likes to limit their runs, puts out a limited run of a game, I don't consider that necessarily rare because that's kind of artificial rarity, right? If you release 100 versions of a game to a market and you're only planning to ever release 100 versions of that game, yes, it's rare, but it's a little different than, say, a game that had a low print run or just had kind of an obscure release time or was recalled for a reason, which is what we're going to be primarily talking about. Also, for the prices that we talk about, we're going to be relying on current price charting estimates. Are these the most accurate? Probably not, but they're definitely the easiest to source, and I didn't feel like going through a bunch of eBay recently sold listings to double check stuff. So we're going to be relying on price charting and hope they did their research. So that being said, let's dive into some of the earlier rare games. Seth, why don't you take it away with a couple of Atari titles?
Yeah, so there's a couple of Atari games that we wanted to talk about in this episode. The first one being Red Sea Crossing, which we talked about in our religious games episode. It was released in 1983 from Steve Stack Incorporated, and you play as Moses when he leads the Israelites out of Egypt. The game's existence was unknown to the broader public until 2007, which is pretty long time to go unknown, being the game was released in 1983. Clearly, Steve Stack did not have a great marketing division. Then again, I think he might have done it alone.
I think it was just Steve Stack. I think Steve Stack Incorporated had a one employee who was also the boss, the president, the CEO, the COO, and the developer and the publisher.
And the roommate of his mom.
Yes.
And there are only 4 copies that are known to exist of Red Sea Crossing. And if you find a Red Sea Crossing in the wild, loose, I don't know if it comes in any other version beyond loose.
None of it has been found, I don't think.
You can look to fetch a price of around $16,000 US, which is a lot of dollars. The other Atari game is Air Raid, which was developed in 1982 by Menavision, which almost sounds like Men at Work, which is the, like
the band?
It's the safety hat song. Yes, Menavision, though. Air Raid is a pretty simple shooter where you try to stop flying saucers from destroying a city. It was on an incredible limited release. The game only has a handful of known copies that exist, with even fewer complete copies. The only known CIB, which is complete in box copy at the time, was discovered in 2010. 2 more copies emerged in October of 2012. Loose, a copy of Air Raid goes for $8,499.99. A complete in-box copy, according to price charting, valued at $33,433.30, which was the last sold comp
Yeah.
from price charting. So the value could be way up, could also be way down.
We actually saw a copy of Air Raid at Too Many Games.
Yeah, was it loose?
It was loose. Air Raid has a very distinct look.
Oh, was it by that guy?
I don't know if it's by that guy.
I'm thinking if the guy, when we went in, there was the booth that was in the front of the building. Then there was a booth that went opposite of that booth in the front. And there was that guy. He had a bunch of things in a glass case, including he had that weird blue game.
That's Air Raid.
Oh, that's Air Raid.
Air Raid's that blue game. Yeah, so it has a very distinct cartridge. It's a blue cartridge with a handle.
That guy, that's the guy I'm talking about.
So he was selling his copy loose for, I think, $20,000.
$20,000?
Yeah, which is more than the price charting loose estimate. But again, he's probably trying to make back what he spent on it.
Right. He probably spent 10 on it, and then he probably wants to double his money. Or he thinks that he's at a convention, so maybe.
Little convention upcharge.
You can get any game at at all the conventions, just more expensive.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you'll find like any game you want, but it's just has a little bit of a extra price tag on it.
Definitely not from like a garage sale special for sure.
Now, speaking of a game that you hope to find at a garage sale special, getting into the NES, Little Samson. This is a very well-known, rare game for the NES, developed in 1992 by Takeru and published by Taito. It's a game that was primarily developed by Shinichi Yashimoto, who previously worked for Capcom. In the game, you play as the titular, Little Samson. You can also play as a dragon named Kakira, a golem named Gam, and a mouse named KO. It's a platformer, kind of similar to the Mega Man games. It's kind of got that vibe to it, and it actually did not sell well on release. It had pretty poor sales. So due to largely poor sales, and also being a later release in the Nintendo's life, 1992, getting close to the era of the Super Nintendo, it didn't necessarily chart up a bunch of sold copies. So it has gone for a bit more in recent years. People have, though, reflected on it by saying it is one of the better NES games, and that's driven desirability of it. Hence why it is considered a collector's item. Loose, you'll probably find a copy for about $2,245. Complete in box, or CIB, for $4,957. New in box, or NIB, $19,829. For context, loose means that it's just a cartridge. Complete in box it comes with the box, the manual, and the cartridge. New in box traditionally means it is sealed. Doesn't always mean it's sealed depending on the type of game. Some games weren't sold sealed, but if it's as good as new, that's where you usually get the highest values. And for Little Samson, that's $19,000. Another title you might find is actually kind of an interesting one. So there is a game that's relatively uncommon just because of its physical cartridge. There's a common version, though, that you can find pretty regularly if you look for it. It's a game called Gotcha the Sport, published in 1987, developed by Atlas and published by LGN. It is a light gun game where you play as a paintballer in a match of Capture the Flag, and it combines the zapper with the gamepad, with most of the gameplay consisting of you shooting at paintball players who walk onto the screen or appear from behind bushes. Now, 1987 was kind of an interesting time for Nintendo. They were encountering some issues with people literally breaking into their cartridges and modifying things in ways they didn't like and potentially stealing things. So they decided they were going to put in some better security methods. And one of that was by slightly changing the screw design. So there was originally a screw design. It was a 5-screw style of cartridge, which was the more common earlier cartridge. And then they updated to a 3-screw design. Because Gotcha came out in the period where they switched during production, there are some 5-screw variants that exist. The 5-screw variants are the expensive version. The 3-screw variants are the common version. But if you find a 5-screw variant, Gotcha, loose, it's about $2,500. Complete, $2,800. New in box, $11,400. And the last game of the NES list is actually one we've also already talked about. We did an Olympics episode a few months back, and as a refresher, during that Olympics episode, we talked about Stadium Events. Developed by Human Entertainment, published by Bandai for the NES, the game was designed to be played with the Family Fun Fitness map. After the release of Stadium Events, Nintendo would acquire the rights to the game and the mat. They renamed the game the World Class Track Meet, and they rebranded the mat as the Power Pad. However, there was a brief period of time where Stadium Events and the Family Fun Fitness mat were available and on the market before the rebranding. shipping. So loose, you find a copy of Family Fun Fitness Stadium events, you're looking at $15,000. Complete, $42,000. New in box, $168,000. I think that'd actually be the most expensive game on this list. This entire episode.
We already hit it, folks. You could stop listening now.
Get out of here.
After the NES comes the SNES. And we have to make an honorable mention to the MACS programs, as they are just too weird not to talk about. These were cartridges designed by the U.S. Army for training purposes. Essentially, they would utilize a realistic-looking rifle as a light gun, typically modeled after a Jaeger AP-74. The carts themselves for the SNES are usually pretty plain-looking, with only a white label indicating what the software is. The games themselves are also pretty basic, and they're target games. And Zach included a picture, and the photograph is of a man dressed in combat fatigues holding what appears to be a large plastic rifle, pointing it at a very small CRT with an SNES next to it. And it looks like he's playing Duck Hunt, but he brought a rifle instead.
It looks like he's executing a CRT.
Yes, it does. It does look like he's brought the CRT to his final day. Now, to go down to the games that we want to talk about, beyond those series of games, which are rare, I don't know, are they particularly valuable, though?
So they're valuable, but the thing is, I just don't consider them they're kind of a cheap grab, right? Because they were exclusively made by the U.S. military. They were not available to be purchased by your regular...
Right.
Your regular sellers and stuff like that. You want to find one in the store. They usually value each cartridge to be a couple of grand. Max Moving Target Simulator is the most expensive. It goes for about $5,000 loose. Max Multi-Purpose Arcade Combat Simulator goes for about, on the low end, like a grand. On the higher end, it can go to about $3,000. And then the basic rifle marksmanship program typically goes for about $2,000.
Nice. Aero Fighters, also called Sonic Wings. Aero Fighters is a vertical scrolling shooter by Video System, released in arcades in 1992 and on SNES in 1993. It's a fairly basic shoot 'em up where you play as a fighter jet and you do your usual shoot 'em up style gameplay of blasting enemies that fly at you. On release for the SNES, the game actually got a few bad reviews, one on GamePro calling it a temporary thrill that eventually retreats to the hangar. The SNES version had a low print run in the US, possibly also caused by the reviews, because once the reviews started coming in, Nintendo were probably like, maybe we don't make as many as we thought we were going to make. Because of the low print run, though, it is sought after as a collector's item. Loose Aero Fighters can go for $963. Complete in box, it would go for $3,843. And new in box, $4,802. The next game, as it were, on the SNES is a popular game that was made popular by YouTube, and that was Hagane, The Final Conflict. Because you know what's cool? Ninjas. You know what else is cool? Cyborgs. Do you know what's the coolest? Ninja cyborgs. Hagane is about a ninja cyborg named Hagane. The game was released in 1994 by CA Production and published by Hudson. It had a low print run and thus a lower supply in the market. Some people say it was a Blockbuster exclusive, but this seems not to be the case and may have been a rumor spread to explain the high price tag. Loose, the game goes for about $1,095. Complete in box is $3,000, and new in box will fetch you $6,447. It's also a game that people talk about relatively frequently.
Yeah, it's not a bad game. It's just a expensive game.
And by people, I mean YouTubers who play retro games.
Yeah, and especially collectors. It's usually like a white whale, I think, for people trying to complete their Super Nintendo collection, because in general, Super Nintendo games don't fetch outrageous prices. They can be expensive. Like Earthbound could go for $400.
But you can get some cheaper versions of those games.
Exactly.
And these games generally do not have cheaper versions available.
Right, exactly.
The last game on the SNES that we're going to talk about is Entertainment Mountain Bike Rally / Speed Racer. It was developed by Life Fitness and Radical Entertainment. Didn't we see a copy of this at Too Many Games too?
We did see a copy of this, and we saw the thing it came with at Too Many Games.
What is the thing that it comes with?
A stationary bike.
Oh, that's right. This compilation of 2 games released for the Life Fitness and Exertainment bike, a stationary bike that you plug into your SNES so you could play games on it. Also, it had an X in it, so it was cool. The games themselves come on a single cartridge, and you use a Mode 7 kind of view where you ride your bike against other racers. You could also punch your opponents. The Speed Racer game has you driving a car instead of a bicycle like you do in Entertainment Mountain Bike Rally. But it is one cartridge, 2 games.
Yeah, it's like a multi-cart.
Loose, the cartridge, fetches you $2,507. If you want a new in-box copy of Entertainment Mountain Bike Rally / Speed Racer, you are looking at paying $10,396. And what's fun is there is a version of the Entertainment Mountain Bike Rally cartridge that was released without Speed Racer, so then it was just Entertainment Mountain Bike Rally. And that will fetch you a lot of money. Tune of $29.
Going on to the Sega Genesis, one of the first games on our list is Musha. Musha was developed by Compile. It is a scrolling shooter that is part of the Aleste series of games by Compile. The game was actually developed to be Aleste 2. It was restructured for various reasons and made into its own game called Musha. It also received mixed reviews on release, though it had a post-release positive reception, largely thanks to its re-release on the Wii's Virtual Console, which helped bring it to a new audience. Due to this renewed interest, it skyrocketed in price. And that's something that happens a lot with retro games. Basically, like, you'll have a game that will come out and it will bomb on release. And then, like, 20 years later, some person on YouTube is like, you know what the best game ever is? And then they'll say that game and it will just start to spike. It just rises up. People used to call that the AVGN effect, because the AVGN would name these games and review them, and they might have been bad, but they were obscure, and thus it kind of drove attention toward these games. More people would buy them, and it, the supply and demand. Now for Musha Loose, you can expect to pay about $243, complete in box $748, and new in box $1,870. Crusader Ascenti is one of the next games on our list, and I beat myself up every day that I didn't pick up the copy of Crusader Ascenti I saw many years ago when it was going for the expensive for me at the time price of like $60, because now it goes for way more. It was developed by Next Tech and released in Japan in 1994. And in Europe and the United States in 1995. Crusader Ascenti is an action-adventure game that often has been compared to The Legend of Zelda in terms of its aesthetic and gameplay. The game looks a lot like a Zelda game. In fact, I wouldn't necessarily blame you if you looked at it and you said, that's just a hack of a Legend of Zelda game, because it looks a lot like a hack of a Legend of Zelda game. It received fairly positive reviews on release, and was largely spread by word of mouth in recent years. Again, people talk about it, it's gone up in price. It also doesn't help it came out in 1995, which is late in the Genesis's lifespan. So, loose you can expect to pay about $445, complete in box $1,325, new in box $3,313. Again, I'm pretty sure the copy I saw was $60 when I saw it, and I said that's a little too expensive for me, and I feel silly. Now, last but not least is Outback Joey. Developed by Western Technologies and published by Heartbeat Corporation, Outback Joey is kind of similar to Entertainment Mountain Bike Rally in the sense that it was bundled with a fitness thing, in this case the Heartbeat Catalyst. The Heartbeat Catalyst was a device used to detect motion, skin salinity, and the heart rate of the wearer, and it communicated this information back to the console itself. You mount your controller to something like a treadmill or an exercise bike, and then you play the game. Your character speed is tied to your heartbeat. The faster your heartbeat is, the faster your character goes. The slower your heartbeat is, such as if you're at rest, the slower your character goes.
You're telling me if I had a Sega Genesis and I had Outback Joey on it, then I had an SNES, and I had my Exertainment bike, I could play Speed Racer on one TV with my SNES and hook myself up to a heart rate monitor and play Outback Joey on my Sega Genesis.
That's right. And then if you get a third TV and you get yourself a Max program, you can carry in one hand the AP-74 Jaeger light gun and shoot at targets.
Perfect.
Outback Joey is relatively uncommon, being that it was only bundled with the Heartbeat Catalyst and was also one of the only games designed to function with the Heartbeat Catalyst. And the Heartbeat Catalyst didn't sell well. So obviously, a little harder to find. A loose copy of Outback Joey will fetch you around $3,571. Complete in-box copy goes for about $5,188. And I couldn't find data on a new in-boxed copy.
Moving on to the next generation and going into the N64 N64. One of the more rare games on the N64 is Bomberman 64, The Second Attack. The sequel to Bomberman 64, the game is identical in gameplay with some added abilities. Another difference between Bomberman 64 and Bomberman 64, The Second Attack is that the bombs explode in a plus shape similar to the classic Bomberman game, which is a departure from the first Bomberman 64, where the bombs explode in a circular shape. And the people who are obsessed with Bomberman may think that that's important. Bomberman 64 The Second Attack was released to mixed reviews, with some people negatively comparing it to the more expansive games like Super Mario 64. The game was released fairly late in the N64's lifespan, being published in North America in 2000. Also, because the Bomberman fandom is relatively niche, it mostly was only sought out after collectors, making it a relatively rare game based on some of those market conditions. Loose, a copy of Bomberman 64 The Second Attack will set you back $247, and completed box, it would set you back $1,100, which I believe these three N64 games that we're going to be talking about would be probably the harder ones to complete an N64 collection, because generally the N64 collection is one of the smaller collections to complete comparatively to NES and SNES.
One of the smaller ones, and also a lot of the heavy hitters don't go for a ton. The N64 has a bunch of expensive cartridges that are like, and this is why I had to put in the caveat about like no prototypes or leaked builds and stuff. There's a whole bunch of not for resale versions, which were demo unit carts, and those go for silly amount of money. Majora's Mask, not for resale demo unit cart, goes for about $10,000 loose. Majora's Mask itself goes for like $70. You know.
Another game that was rare on the N64, or is rare on the N64, is Super Bowling, which was developed by KID and initially released in 1992 for the SNES. The game was remade on the N64 and released in Japan in 1999 and in the US in the year 2000. As the name implies, it's a bowling game. The game does feature some colorful characters for the bowlers, with a penguin and a fairy being two playable characters. However, being released in 2000 put it at the later end of the N64 run, and thus it had a lower production run, creating similar market conditions that Bomberman 64 Second Attack had. Loose, Super Bowling will fetch you $513, complete in box $2,337, and new in box $7,246. Now moving on to Clay Fighter Sculptor's Cut, developed by Interplay Productions and released in 1998. Sculptor's Cut is a re-release of Clay Fighter 63 and a third. It's virtually the same game, though it contains 4 exclusive characters: High Five, a severed hand; Lady Liberty, the Statue of Liberty who has come to life; Lockjaw Pooch, a dog that was marked as killed during the production of 63 and 1/3; and Zappa Cow Wow Boys, 3 brothers who summon a goat and are cannibals. There is also a new storyline, adjusted combat, and various other minor changes. Sculptor's Cut was released exclusively through Blockbuster. Unlike other games that we talked about who may have been exclusively released through Blockbuster, Sculptor's Cut was in fact exclusively released through Blockbuster when Blockbuster was actually a powerhouse. Loose, a copy of Clay Fighter Sculptor's Cut will set you back $1,046, complete in box $5,420, and new in box, a sweet nice copy of Clay Fighter Sculptor's Cut will run you $16,804.
Well, rounding off this episode, we're going to be talking about the PlayStation 1. We could obviously keep going and going and going into the modern era, but we're not, because it's not what we do. For the PlayStation 1, though, it's really kind of interesting because these are 3 relatively common games that just have weird variant releases. First off is Mortal Kombat 3, which was released for a variety of systems in 1995. It's the 3rd game in the Mortal Kombat series, and it's a major game. Mortal Kombat 3, let me tell you, for the PlayStation 1, not uncommon. You can find a loose copy for about $19, complete in box for about $39.69. However, the complete copy you're going to find most likely is the long box copy. So some PlayStation 1 games came in a long box, which, as the name implies, is a box that is long. I want to say it's probably about the height of a DVD case, maybe a little taller. For some reason, there is a jewel case variant of Mortal Kombat 3. The jewel case variant is the expensive version. And here's the weird thing. It's more expensive loose than the long box version. So a loose copy of Mortal Kombat 3 from the jewel case, $500. And my question is, what's the point? From my understanding, there's no difference. But if you find an actual jewel cased copy of Mortal Kombat 3, complete in box, or complete in case rather, about $851. New in its case, $2,213.
If it's loose and one sells for significantly less and there's no difference.
So my guess is there must be a way to tell, right? Like, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to sell a loose copy for $500. So there's probably something in like the print code or something. On the CDs, they're sometimes stamped with like the serial codes and stuff. So there must be a difference in the serial that does distinguish it. But here's the thing. Sometimes rare games are stupid. Just a little tangent. Sonic 1 for the Sega Master System was released in Europe. Very common game to find. You can probably find a copy for about $30 complete. In the United States, less common. It was one of the last games released on the Sega Master System, so it goes for $600 versus the European release, which goes for about $30. Now, here's the difference. On the American copy, on the back label, they put a sticker on it of a UPC code. A peelable sticker of a UPC code.
But isn't it also NTSC?
There's no difference.
Why is there no difference? It's the other one's PAL region, isn't it?
So PAL games will play perfectly on an NTSC Sega Master System console. There was no need to adjust the code.
Oh.
Literally the only difference is there is a printable, peelable sticker that they put on the back. It's the UPC sticker. It's literally the barcode. That's all it is. That's the only difference. Just a silly tangent about why sometimes variants can be a little strange, and in my opinion, a little stupid. Another variant release is Siphon Filter 3. Again, Siphon Filter, pretty common game. Siphon Filter 3 also pretty common, released in 2001 by Sony. It's a third-person shooter. It's the third game of the Siphon Filter series, which is, pretty popular, decent series. I think I played the first one. I kind of liked it. However, the game had some unfortunate timing. The original cover art featured the main character standing in front of an exploding building with an American flag behind him. It was due to be released on September 25th, 2001. Something happened that month that required them to recall the copy that they released because they felt it was in potentially poor taste. And that was 9/11. So they recalled the game, but they didn't recall all of the copies. So there are some copies out there that the artwork is the original artwork of the American flag in a burning building behind the main character. This copy of the game loose goes for $576, complete in box about $1,000, and new in box $2,600. Lastly, again, another variant, NFL Blitz 2000, the Greatest Hits Edition. NFL Blitz games are really kind of fun. They're probably due for an episode all in themselves if we ever want to cover them. They're basically like NBA Jam, but for football. They're kind of less realistic NFL games. More arcadey gameplay. They were literally designed for arcade systems. They're not really your Madden games. They're not really your Tecmo games. They're not really designed to be taken as seriously. But NFL Blitz 2000 was part of the series, and despite its name, was actually released in 1999 for the arcade, PS1, N64, Dreamcast, PC, and Game Boy Color. Now, I got some of this information from the reputable website sportsgamersonline.com, and what they said is it's not entirely sure why the Greatest Hits variant had fewer copies available in production than the first run. Typically, the way it worked for Sony PlayStation games is that the Greatest Hits variants were made when a game had been on the market for at least 1 year and sold more than 150,000 units. In many cases, Greatest Hits re-releases are actually typically less than first run releases. For example, a complete Spyro the Dragon Greatest Hits is estimated to be about $17. The first run of Spyro the Dragon is about $25. The greatest hits version of NFL Blitz Loose goes for $1,728. Complete in box $2,998, and new in box $7,796. Now, if you want to pick up the game in the non-greatest hits version, Loose $10, complete $14, new sealed $100. So I just think it's very interesting that this game sold very well enough to get a greatest hits version. And the greatest hits version, they just didn't print a lot of copies of it for some reason. And no one's really sure why, but just a kind of odd little quirk in the PlayStation's history, and I think a fun way to wrap up this episode. So that being said, that's going to cover our rare, expensive games. And again, this is a rabbit hole we could go into. We could talk about some of the really strange variant competition cartridges. We didn't even touch upon prototype cartridges. Really, the list goes on and on and on. But to make things easier, this will be what we focus on for this episode. And if you want to hear more or you want us to expand on this list, let us know. And before I let you know how you can do that, we're going to get into our retro rewind. So Seth had me play Brawl Brothers for the Super Nintendo. Developed by Jellico in 1992, Brawl Brothers is a side-scrolling beat-em-up that feels like they ripped the art out of Street Fighter 2 and put it in a beat-em-up. I played as a guy who vaguely looks like Vega. His name was Kazan. And I had to choose like a backup partner, and I picked the guy who vaguely looked like M. Bison, and I didn't catch his name. Kazan had the ability to do this move where he disappears, and then he goes so fast you don't see him, and then it clears all the enemies off from the screen. And I don't know if I had a limit on this, because I kept being able to do it. So I think Kazan is just really good at his ability.
Is it like that time when we discovered how to do the special move in Shredder's Revenge, and then we proceeded...
Yeah.
to only do the special move over and over again till the end?
It was just like that. I don't know if it just kept filling up fast and I was like just doing really well, but it's kind of an odd beat 'em up. One thing I really didn't like is that, so you know when you're playing a beat 'em up and the enemies come on the screen and you're fighting them and you kill all of them and then it says go, right?
Yeah.
In this, it just would randomly say go when there were still enemies on the screen, and I felt like it was trying to rush me.
It said you're too slow.
I know. It was stressing me out because I was like, I just got here. Please don't tell me to go. Anyway, Brawl Brothers, it was apparently well liked when it came out, but I didn't like it. I thought it was kind of boring. I also thought it looked like they stole graphics from Street Fighter to the point where if I was a lawyer, I would have been like, hey, don't do that. So anyway, does it hold up? I don't think so. But next week, Seth, you can play Super Godzilla for the Super Nintendo.
I think I will. Zach had me play Contra Hardcore, and core this way is spelled with a P and an S for like the group, like a Corps of Engineers or something. And this was released for the Sega Genesis. Released in 1994 by Konami, Contra Hardcore is actually the first Contra series to be released on a Sega platform. Takes place 5 years after Contra 3, the Alien Wars, and a new task force is created called the Hardcore. And you are part of this task force, and you are sent off to deal with problems, mostly Contra-related problem, like large aliens and all sorts of like bad guys and shooting and all that stuff. The game actually has a number of different paths to go and has multiple endings, and you have 4 different options of people to play as: a guy, a girl, a robot, and a dog. Which is great. Anytime that there's a dog and a robot in the mix, you know I'm down to play, which is why I really like Toxic Crusader, because there's definitely a dog and a robot in there. Well, cyborg. The game's a blast and really enjoys the blast processing power of the Sega Genesis, and it plays fast and tight. Just a really good version of Contra. If you enjoy Contra and you want to check it out on the Sega Genesis to see what the Genesis does, Nintendo don't, then check out Contra Hardcore. It definitely holds up in my opinion. Next week, Zach, you could play Atomic Robo Kid for the Sega Genesis.
Great, I will. Well, thank you everyone for listening to this episode. As a friendly reminder, we're going to be at PAX East in a couple of weekends, so be sure to look out for us. We'll be there on Friday and Saturday. And spoiler alert, that's a little hint of what next week's episode is going to be. But in any case, thank you again for listening. You can always email us at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. You can find us on social media, Classic Gaming Brothers or CG Brothers Pod. We're available wherever podcasts can be found, be it Podbean, iTunes, or iHeartRadio. And with that, Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That's right.